He was the perfect illusion. A law student, a volunteer, a man with a bright future. No one knew the darkness that lurked beneath his charming facade. Women vanished, one after another, with no signs of struggle, no clues left behind. Police were baffled, unaware that the killer moved among them, watching, waiting, hunting. He played the role of a helpless stranger, a man with a broken arm, a kind smile, and a polite request. And then, darkness. By the time they realized the truth, it was already too late. This is the horrifying tale of Ted Bundy, the predator who hid in plain sight. Ted Bundy was born on November 24, 1946, in Burlington, Vermont. His early life was shrouded in secrecy and deception. Raised by his grandparents, he was led to believe that his mother, Eleanor Louise Cowell, was actually his sister. This revelation, which he discovered later in life, contributed to his deep-seated feelings of betrayal and resentment. Despite this turbulent beginning, Bundy appeared to be a normal, intelligent child, displaying an early fascination with social behavior and psychology. As a teenager, Bundy exhibited disturbing traits, including a lack of empathy and a tendency toward manipulation. He was highly intelligent, but socially awkward, struggling to form genuine connections. However, he learned to mask these deficiencies with charm and confidence, traits that would later aid him in his crimes. He studied psychology at the University of Washington, where he began to refine his ability to manipulate others. His professors saw him as a bright student, and his peers found him charismatic. During this time, he fell in love with Stephanie Brooks, an elegant and ambitious woman who represented the success and status Bundy desperately desired. Their relationship was intense, but it ultimately ended when Brooks saw through his facade and realized his lack of direction and ambition. Bundy was devastated. The rejection left him with feelings of deep inadequacy and anger, which festered over time. Determined to prove himself, Bundy reinvented his image. He pursued law school and political aspirations, using his charm and wit to gain influence. However, beneath the surface, darkness was growing. His obsession with control and dominance, combined with his ability to deceive, set the stage for one of the most terrifying crime sprees in American history. By the early 1970s, Ted Bundy had perfected the art of deception. He crafted a persona that made him appear harmless and even endearing. One of his favorite tactics was pretending to be injured, using a sling or crutches to feign vulnerability. This trick appealed to the kindness of unsuspecting women, who willingly helped him carry books or load items into his car. It was in these moments of trust that he struck. Bundy's first known murders occurred in 1974 in Washington and Oregon. Young women began disappearing mysteriously, leaving behind few clues. Most of his victims bore a striking resemblance to Stephanie Brooks, his former girlfriend. They were young, attractive, and had dark hair parted in the middle. This eerie pattern went unnoticed at first, as police struggled to link the missing persons cases. His method was chillingly calculated. Bundy would knock his victims unconscious, abduct them, and take them to secluded locations where he would assault and ultimately kill them. He often revisited crime scenes, sometimes even engaging in necrophiliac acts with the corpses. These details remained unknown to investigators at the time, as Bundy meticulously covered his tracks. Despite the growing number of disappearances, law enforcement was baffled. The idea of a charming, well-spoken man being responsible for such heinous crimes seemed unimaginable. Witnesses provided vague descriptions of a man named Ted, sometimes seen driving a Volkswagen Beetle, but the information wasn't enough to identify the killer. As Bundy's confidence grew, so did his brutality. His killing spree escalated, spreading across multiple states, leaving a trail of fear and confusion. With no clear suspects and a lack of forensic evidence, police struggled to keep up, unaware that they were dealing with one of the most prolific serial killers in history. Ted Bundy's second known killing spree escalated in both brutality and cunning. After his initial murders in early 1974, he refined his techniques, growing more confident and elusive. His next major attack occurred on the night of January 31st, 1974, when he broke into the basement apartment of Linda Ann Healy, a 21-year-old University of Washington student. Linda was a bright, responsible young woman who lived with roommates and was known for her involvement in campus life. That night, Bundy silently entered her home, crept into her room, and attacked her as she slept. He knocked her unconscious, possibly strangling her just enough to subdue her, then wrapped her in a bedsheet and carried her away without anyone noticing. Her disappearance was baffling. Her bed was neatly made, her alarm clock was set, and her belongings remained untouched, as if she had simply vanished. However, small bloodstains on her pillow and nightgown hinted at something sinister. Linda's case terrified the community. No signs of forced entry meant the killer was either skilled or had gained access in an unknown way. The investigation yielded few clues, leaving police frustrated. Her body wasn't found until over a year later, buried in Taylor Mountain, a remote dumping ground where Bundy disposed of multiple victims. This marked a shift in Bundy's tactics. He grew bolder, entering homes and attacking women in their sleep. In the months that followed, young women began disappearing at an alarming rate, all sharing eerily similar characteristics. Bundy was evolving into a more efficient predator, fine-tuning his ability to hunt, manipulate, and kill without leaving a trace. The authorities had no idea they were up against a monster who was only just beginning his reign of terror. Ted Bundy's attacks escalated in 1974 as he expanded beyond Washington and Oregon, extending his reign of terror into Utah and Colorado. No longer satisfied with his previous methods, he became more daring and calculated, refining his ability to lure unsuspecting victims. His tactics evolved. Instead of breaking into homes, he approached women in public places, such as college campuses, libraries, or shopping centers. One of his most infamous ploys involved feigning injury, wearing a sling or using crutches to appear vulnerable. With a charming demeanor, he would ask young women for assistance with his car, often a tan Volkswagen Beetle. Once they agreed to help, he struck swiftly, overpowering them before taking them to a secluded location. His abductions were quick, efficient, and well-planned, leaving minimal evidence behind. As his attacks increased, police began noticing eerie similarities. The victims bore a striking resemblance to one another. Most had long, dark hair parted in the middle. Witnesses occasionally reported seeing a man named Ted driving a Beetle, but with little else to go on, law enforcement struggled to make meaningful progress. Despite mounting disappearances, Bundy continued to evade suspicion, aided by his seemingly respectable persona as a law student in Utah. By mid-1975, Bundy's confidence soared. He became more reckless, sometimes abducting multiple women in a single day. His growing addiction to murder drove him to take greater risks, leading him to venture into Colorado, where he abducted and murdered Corinne Campbell, a 23-year-old nurse. As Bundy's body count climbed, law enforcement across multiple states began to collaborate, piecing together a chilling pattern. But Bundy, emboldened by his success, believed he was invincible. His arrogance would ultimately contribute to his downfall. In August 1975, Ted Bundy's luck finally ran out. Late one night in Granger, Utah, a police officer spotted Bundy's tan Volkswagen Beetle driving erratically. Suspecting a burglary, the officer pulled him over. Inside the car, authorities discovered an unsettling array of tools: handcuffs, a crowbar, an ice pick, pantyhose with eye holes cut out, and rope. Items that pointed to something far more sinister than burglary. Though he was initially arrested on suspicion of possessing burglary tools, Bundy was released on bail, maintaining his charm and composure. However, investigators soon began connecting the dots. Witnesses from attempted kidnappings in Utah identified Bundy as the man who had tried to lure them into his car. Authorities in Washington and Colorado, who were already investigating a series of disappearances, started examining him more closely. When police searched his apartment, they found maps of mountain areas, handcuffs, and a collection of women's clothing, items that hinted at his double life. As suspicions mounted, Bundy was formally charged with the 1974 attempted abduction of Carol DeRanche, a young woman who had narrowly escaped from him. During his trial in 1976, Bundy maintained his signature arrogance. Instead of relying on legal counsel, he chose to represent himself, leveraging his knowledge as a former law student to manipulate the courtroom. His confidence, charm, and ability to delay proceedings frustrated the prosecution, but it wasn't enough to save him. He was convicted of kidnapping and sentenced to 15 years in prison. Yet, Bundy was not finished. While locked away in a Colorado jail, he began plotting an audacious escape, one that would prove his cunning and send shockwaves through law enforcement. The world had not seen the last of Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy's first escape was as audacious as it was unexpected. On June 7, 1977, while awaiting trial in Aspen, Colorado, he was granted access to the courthouse law library to prepare his defense. Left unshackled and under minimal supervision, Bundy seized the opportunity. While the guard was momentarily distracted, he jumped from a second-story window, landing roughly but unharmed. He disappeared into the rugged Colorado wilderness, surviving on stolen food and supplies. After 6 days of evading authorities, weakened and exhausted, Bundy was finally recaptured while attempting to steal a car. But Bundy was far from finished. Determined to gain his freedom, he meticulously planned a second escape, this time ensuring it would be permanent. Over several months, he studied the layout of his jail cell, identifying a weak spot in the ceiling. By gradually chiseling away at it with a stolen hacksaw blade, he created an opening just large enough to squeeze through. On the night of December 30th, 1977, with guards distracted by holiday festivities, Bundy crawled through the ceiling, maneuvered through an empty apartment above the jail, and exited into the cold night. This time, he succeeded. He made his way to Chicago, then Michigan, eventually traveling to Florida. There, with no money and a growing desperation, he unleashed his most brutal attacks yet. On January 15, 1978, he broke into the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University, assaulting and murdering multiple young women in a frenzy of violence. The nation was horrified, and law enforcement agencies across the country launched a massive manhunt. Bundy, now one of America's most wanted criminals, continued his rampage, leaving terror and devastation in his wake. But his freedom would not last forever. Ted Bundy's rage reached its peak in the early hours of January 15, 1978, when he broke into Florida State University's Chi Omega sorority house in Tallahassee. Armed with a wooden club, he launched a brutal attack on 4 young women as they slept. Within minutes, He had bludgeoned and strangled Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy to death, while gravely injuring Karen Chandler and Kathy Kleiner. His attacks were frenzied, showing his increasing loss of control. Before leaving the house, Bundy bit one of the victims, a crucial mistake that would later provide forensic evidence against him. Just hours later, fueled by adrenaline and bloodlust, Bundy entered the apartment of Cheryl Thomas, a dance student living nearby. He attacked her viciously, leaving her with a broken jaw and permanent hearing loss. Despite his growing recklessness, he managed to escape detection once again, slipping into the darkness. The brutality of the Florida murders captured national attention, with media outlets warning women to stay vigilant. Law enforcement intensified their manhunt, determined to put an end to Bundy's reign of terror. But he was not finished. Less than a month later, on February 9th, Bundy kidnapped 12-year-old Kimberly Leach from her school in Lake City, Florida. He brutally assaulted and murdered the young girl, leaving her body in an abandoned pig shed. This horrifying act marked his final known killing. By now, the net was closing around him. Bundy, once a master manipulator who evaded capture with ease, was running out of time. His own arrogance and carelessness had left a trail of evidence, and law enforcement was closing in. The man who had spent years outwitting authorities was about to face justice. On February 15, 1978, Ted Bundy's luck finally ran out. In Pensacola, Florida, Officer David Lee pulled him over for a routine traffic stop. Bundy, who had been on the run, was driving a stolen orange Volkswagen Beetle with suspiciously mismatched plates. As the officer approached, Bundy attempted to flee, but Lee overpowered and arrested him after a brief struggle. During a search of the vehicle, authorities found stolen credit cards, multiple forms of identification, a crowbar, gloves, and other suspicious items. Clear indicators that Bundy was planning another attack or escape. This time, there would be no way out. Bundy was quickly linked to the Florida murders, and the evidence against him was overwhelming. His fingerprints were found at the Chi Omega crime scene, and bite mark analysis from one of the victims confirmed his guilt. The trial that followed became a media spectacle, as Bundy, ever the narcissist, insisted on representing himself. His confidence and charm, which had once allowed him to evade suspicion, now worked against him in the courtroom. The prosecution painted a chilling picture of his violent spree, leaving no doubt about his culpability. Despite his intelligence and legal knowledge, Bundy could not outmaneuver the justice system. In July 1979, he was convicted of the Chi Omega murders and sentenced to death. A year later, he was found guilty of murdering 12-year-old Kimberly Leach, receiving a second death sentence. Even behind bars, Bundy continued to manipulate those around him, using charm and deception to delay his execution through endless appeals. However, the families of his victims demanded justice, and the world watched, awaiting the moment when Ted Bundy would finally face the consequences of his monstrous actions. Ted Bundy finally began confessing to his crimes, hoping to delay the inevitable. He admitted to killing at least 30 women across multiple states, though experts believe the actual number was much higher, possibly over 100. His confessions were chilling, revealing the calculated brutality of his attacks. He described how he stalked his victims, the methods he used to lure them, and the gruesome details of their final moments. Despite his admissions, Bundy showed little genuine remorse, often speaking about his crimes with eerie detachment. During interviews, he attempted to shift the blame, claiming that pornography had fueled his violent fantasies. He also pointed to his troubled childhood, insisting that his urges stemmed from deep-seated psychological wounds. But those who studied him believed Bundy was merely trying to manipulate public perception, as he had done throughout his life. He played mind games with investigators, sometimes offering information in exchange for delays to his execution. He hinted at knowing the locations of undiscovered bodies, dangling the possibility of closure for victims' families as a bargaining chip. Even as he sat on death row, Bundy sought ways to maintain control. He gave multiple interviews, including a high-profile discussion with psychologist Dr. James Dobson, in which he again blamed violent media and societal influences for his actions. But the families of his victims were unmoved by his attempts to shift responsibility. They had waited years for justice, and now his time was running out. Bundy's final days were marked by desperation. He oscillated between arrogance and fear, knowing there was no escape this time. As the world watched, the end of one of history's most notorious serial killers drew near, bringing a small measure of closure to those he had terrorized. Ted Bundy was executed in the electric chair at Florida State Prison. His final moments were marked by tension and eerie silence as he was led to the execution chamber. Witnesses described him as pale and anxious, a stark contrast to the confident and manipulative persona he had maintained throughout his trials. As he was strapped into the chair, prison officials placed a wet sponge on his head to ensure maximum conductivity before securing the metal cap. The room was filled with law enforcement officials, journalists, and family members of his victims, all waiting for justice to be served. Before the switch was flipped, Bundy was given the opportunity to speak his final words. He reportedly said, "Give my love to my family and friends." A simple yet unsettling farewell from a man who had inflicted so much pain. At the moment of execution, a powerful surge of electricity coursed through his body, causing his hands to clench and his body to convulse. Within minutes, he was pronounced dead, his reign of terror finally coming to an end. Outside the prison, a massive crowd of spectators had gathered, many holding signs that read, "Burn, Bundy, burn," and celebrating the long-awaited moment. Some even set off fireworks, treating his execution as a moment of triumph. While Bundy's death brought a sense of closure to some, for the families of his victims, no punishment could truly erase the horror of his crimes. Even after his death, the fascination with Ted Bundy persisted. Criminologists, psychologists, and the general public continued to study his life, searching for answers to the question that haunted so many. How could someone who appeared so normal, charming, intelligent, and well-mannered be capable of such monstrous acts? His case became a chilling reminder that evil can wear a mask of normalcy, and his legacy remains one of darkness and horror in the annals of American criminal history. Ted Bundy remains one of the most infamous serial killers in history. His crimes not only shocked the world, but also transformed the way law enforcement handled serial murder investigations. Bundy's ability to evade capture for years exposed major gaps in interagency communication, prompting the development of more advanced criminal databases and coordinated efforts between state and federal authorities. The FBI's Behavioral Science Unit intensified its work in psychological profiling, refining methods that would later help catch other serial killers. Bundy's case also highlighted the need for forensic advancements. His conviction was among the first to rely heavily on bite mark analysis, a controversial but pivotal piece of evidence at the time. The scrutiny of his case ultimately led to improvements in forensic dentistry, DNA analysis, and crime scene investigation techniques. Beyond law enforcement, Bundy's story left a deep psychological and cultural impact. Books, documentaries, and films continue to dissect his life, attempting to understand the mind of a killer who maintained a veneer of charm and intelligence while committing horrific acts. His televised trial in 1979 was one of the first of its kind, turning him into a macabre celebrity and setting a precedent for the modern media fascination with true crime. Despite his ability to manipulate the public, Bundy was a remorseless predator whose true nature could not be hidden forever. He remains a case study in psychopathy, a chilling example of how evil can wear a friendly face. His story serves as a warning that danger can lurk behind even the most charismatic personas, reminding society to remain vigilant and never underestimate the darkness that can reside within seemingly ordinary individuals. The woman who escaped, Ted Bundy, tells her story. Ted Bundy, one of America's most infamous serial killers, lured dozens of young women to their deaths using his charm, intelligence, and manipulative tactics. However, not all of his victims met a tragic end. One woman, who miraculously escaped his clutches, lived to tell a terrifying story that offers chilling insight into Bundy's methods. It was a late evening when she encountered Bundy, who posed as a man in distress, struggling with an injured arm. Pretending to need assistance, he asked her for help carrying books to his car. Trusting his seemingly harmless demeanor, she agreed, but as soon as she reached his vehicle, the situation took a terrifying turn. Bundy attempted to shove her inside, but something deep within her signaled danger. She fought back with every ounce of strength she had, managing to break free and flee before he could restrain her. Shaken but alive, she later recounted the incident to authorities, who at the time had no idea that Bundy was already on a brutal killing spree. Her survival was not just a stroke of luck, it was a testament to her instincts and willpower. Her story became one of the many puzzle pieces that helped investigators eventually capture Bundy. Even today, her escape serves as a haunting reminder of the importance of trusting one's gut feeling and staying vigilant, especially around seemingly charming strangers. While many fell victim to Bundy's deception, this woman's courage not only saved her life, but also played a crucial role in unmasking one of history's most dangerous criminals.